Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, everybody. This is Hard-Won Wisdom, and I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And today we have somebody who I have always looked up to as one of the best writers anywhere. She is so acclaimed, so accomplished, but her story is so powerful. It's gripping, and it shows us what we have to do to find the courage within ourselves to live the lives that we deserve to live. So let me introduce you to Connie May Fowler. And I can go through this, award-winning novelist, memoirist, screenwriter, essayist, poet, and teacher. She runs writing conferences. She has 8 books. They are just amazing books. They've been made into movies. She is, she's won all these awards. This is the kind of writer we would all want to be if we could, but nobody is. Only Connie is Connie. So Connie, I just want to welcome you here and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Just a heroic story. She's inspired many. Her words are lush and beautiful, and the story behind her is one that is unforgettable. And so let's just start right there, Connie. If you can tell the Connie May Fowler story of what brought you here into your power.
Well, I was born into a very violent household. We were not bitterly poor, but poor. That didn't matter. What mattered were the nightly fights. Every night my father came home, and every night there were these violent fights. And it was truly hell. And so, but then he died. My father died when I was, I think, 6. And my mother spiraled completely out of control. And then we were very poor. I mean, we were on aid to women, independent children, I think it's called, basically welfare. And we lived in a series of very questionable, very poor places. I went back and visited the first place we lived after my father died. And I remembered it was a travel trailer, the outer edges of one of those old kind of 1940s motels. I think they were called motor lodges back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we found it. And this thing in Before Women Had Wings, I think I described it as a blister. That's what it was. It was shaped like a blister. It was pale pink, and it was the size of, I don't know, maybe a small living room. I don't know how we did it. I just don't. And
how many people in there?
3.
Wow.
And it was filled with vermin, just spiders as big as my hand, cockroaches, just rats. I don't know why we also weren't always so sick, but she just continued to spiral, and she became very, very violent. And so I spent my childhood being beaten and called the worst names no mother should ever call a child. And books saved me. As soon as I could, I started reading. And then as soon as I could hold a pencil, I started writing. And I would write on anything because we were so poor, like we didn't have like stacks of paper around. Paper costs money. But I would often write on we used to have brown paper bags for grocery bags.
Right.
So I'd write on those, and then I would burn them before she came home because I knew if she read what I wrote, I would be beaten maybe not survive the beating.
What were you writing?
I would write anything. I think some of it was confessional. Some of it was, I would write poetry. I think the poetry was really about having a new life, a different kind of life. But the key to all of this is that in books, I realized that not everyone lived the way we did, that there was a different kind of life out there. So it was in books that I found my role models, and books I knew I could find a better life. And attendant to that were that I had just really wonderful teachers. And so they also became my role model. So despite the absolute hell of my home life, I disappeared into books, and then I disappeared into learning.
Wow. So which books caught you first, and what kinds of books were they?
I read everything. it didn't matter. But I remember one book that I really loved was called Strawberry Girl by Lois Linsky. Part of it might be because it was set in Plant City, which is down the road from Tampa, and very poor. And but they had this loving family, and I'm like, that seems. So I kind of adopted myself into that world and into that book. Um, and it was so funny. Years later, somebody gave me a copy, and I read the foreword that she wrote in that book, and it was very much about environmentalism. And I had been working a lot in the environmental movement then, and I realized I'd never had an original thought. It was all from Lois Linsky's foreword to Strawberry Girl.
Was she still alive once you became famous?
No,
Or you never were able to?
no, I never met her. And I, oddly enough, because I started reading biographies, and I was fascinated by the opera composer Verdi, Giuseppe Verdi. And I read every, it was nuts. I read every bio I could find on him. And I think it was because he was such a greatly talented man, but also a deeply flawed man. So he reminded me of my father. So I think that's why I was so attracted to that. But at any rate, I mean, that's what, I wouldn't be sitting here today if it weren't for finding life through books.
Michelle, you grabbed your heart when she said Strawberry Girl. What's
Yes, so that was a very special book for me also, and not the extreme story that you've had, but I grew up in a very violent, volatile home. And I know, Connie, I read a story or an interview with you that talked about how your sister would put you in spaces and read to you early on when you were young. And it just really struck a chord because there was a there was a linen closet in our house. And when my parents would begin fighting, I would sit in that linen closet because I could surround myself with the blankets and
Mm.
covers, and I would feel protected because it was really the only place in that house that I felt safe. And it really struck me as you shared that story early on, what an impact that your sister had on you to introduce you to books
Absolutely.
initially.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so grateful to her. And I'm so also grateful that we're now closer as we start to age than we ever were even before. But yeah, she was my first reader. And I think that for her too, it probably helped because as she's reading to me, I'm disappearing into the world that of the story, and she's being able to disappear into the world of the story and maybe even voice because she's reading aloud. So it allowed us both to try to separate ourselves from the violence outside that bedroom door.
Just beautiful. I mean, difficult time, but just a beautiful moment for you to
Yes.
have, to hold on to. And then from there, were there other books that you really were able to lean into that made a big impression?
I think when I got older and I decided that our fate or something decided that, your job in life is to write, there were other stories. But before that, then my mother died. I think I was 18. And it was so sad because, she just never really had a chance. And as I age, I start to see her differently. Maybe hopefully with greater wisdom. So, for instance, every time she had a child, she was convinced she was going to die. I don't know why, but she just was convinced. And so, you know how we always have family stories that get trotted out at Thanksgiving. So this was a family story.
Just the worst
She's
ones.
pregnant. Usually they're happy stories. I guess this one sort of is. She's pregnant with me. She's convinced she's going to die. She's convinced my father she's going to die. She's convinced everyone she's going to die. And then sure enough, she has me and she's not dead. But it was only, I wrote an essay for an anthology, I think last year. And then it was in the writing that I realized, wait a minute, this woman spent 9 months of her life thinking that whatever was growing inside her was going to kill her.
wow?
How horrible that must have been. I mean, my compassion for her grew tenfold. I mean, I'll never know why she had that fear, except she did have difficult pregnancies. But that just 9 months thinking you're going to die,
That,
how horrible for her. And I'm so grateful I figured that out. It did open up a door for me to try to understand her more.
Yeah, that's the thing about writing fiction that I love. And again, I'm a nonfiction writer. I'm not, but when I do fiction, the thing I love is because these characters do have resemblances to people that I've met along the way. And if there's something I haven't understood about their behavior or what happened, you have to get into their motivations and their perspective. Has that helped you in understanding the other people in your life through your writing?
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. It's also it- it's an odd thing, but once I write it, like sometimes I don't know. This is gonna sound like I'm crazy, but sometimes I don't know if the version that I wrote is real versus real life. And then at some point, it doesn't matter because the act of writing healed the wound,
Wow.
and I can just leave it and go forward in my life.
And then from your childhood, then things even get more complicated and difficult.
Yeah. When my mom died, um, I completely fell apart, which is counterintuitive. Like this person, I mean, the last thing she said to me, she's in the hospital bed dying, and I go to visit her. And I don't know what to say, but I try to tell her about my day at school. I was in college. And she said, I said, well, my professor, Dr. Solomon, said blah, 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 blah. And she said, you tell him to go to hell. You go to hell. The last words my mother ever said to me were, you go to hell.
Wow.
And so you think after that, somebody passes and you're like, wow, I can go on with my life now. No, I completely fell apart. I completely fell apart.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, do you think it was just because you were so accustomed to that dysfunction? And it's,
Yeah, I've looked into it, and it's not uncommon when someone's been that domineering and tried to control all aspects of your life, that when they're gone, there's just this huge, like, what now?
Wow.
So I was in college, and there was a local radio personality in Tampa that she listened to every day. And she would say things like, if I were a younger woman, I would marry that man. Well, he was my professor. And so I started in a relationship with him. And that's my taste of domestic violence, my first taste of domestic violence, where I was the victim, not my mother. And it took me, I don't know how long anymore. I think maybe 5 years to get out of it. I think the average is 7, or I know it used to be 7, but it really does take a village to be able to get out of that. And so if you look at my story, I never had agency. I always lived in a situation that was violent. I admit that I was always living in a state of chaos. And so think of a woman who's in for even 1 year, 2 year, 3 years in a state of constant chaos with no agency. And you're going to ask them to like get it together enough to walk out that door, where that's the time, the most dangerous time in that cycle. They could end up being homeless. They could end up having support of no one, because very often they keep it quiet. So you're just simply going to show up at your friend's house and say, I left him. And they're like, no, you just need to go back home. So, I mean, it's just, very often batterers keep control of the money. They'll use children, they'll use pets, everything against the person trying to leave.
Well, and they've used emotional abuse to make
Right.
them feel like no one will ever want them, that there's no way they can make it on their own, that you're nothing without me, and this is it.
That's right.
But when you were in it, did you do the mental gymnastics of saying, boy, I'm in that cycle of abuse and it's repeating?
I wasn't even aware of that kind of language, like cycle of abuse. I do remember doing this really crazy thing. And that was, I got in my car and I drove around the corner to the spring, which is what the in Hyde Park in Tampa, which is where the battered women's shelter was once located. And I sat out there in my car wanting to go in order to volunteer. And I couldn't do it because I said to myself, I'm not qualified. I don't know. I wouldn't know how to help those women. That's how deeply I didn't see myself. Like something propelled me to get in the car and go over there as if I'm going to help somebody else, not recognizing I was the one that needed the help. And then I couldn't walk in the door.
When I was doing my big thing on domestic violence as a reporter, and one of the women that were running the safe house eventually told me that she was being beaten while she was in there. I mean, it's like she's a leader in that movement and a victim at the same time.
It's interesting though, how sometimes you find the strength for others,
Yeah.
but you don't know how to find the strength for yourself.
Yeah.
And and I'm curious, Connie, even with your story, how did you find the courage to begin to share what you were writing?
Well, I think because writing has always, books and writing literally saved my life. And it was always there for me that, and my teachers were safe places for me, that sharing it was just something I did. And it was just an outgrowth. Maybe it's an outgrowth of trying to survive it also. So that, and if I fictionalize it, the secret remained a secret because you had to hide. You couldn't let anybody know your mother was beating you. You couldn't let anybody know that your boyfriend was beating you, because that's secret. I mean, they make sure you keep that secret. It's a psychological trick. And so, but if I was writing it as fiction, the secret remained intact.
And then you got a dog.
Yes, Katie. Well, she would absolutely put herself between myself and my abuser and protect me. And the abuse just was spiraling out of hand and getting weirder and weirder. He was getting more and more violent. And I finally one night barricaded myself in a bedroom, and so that he couldn't get in. He was trying to get into me and trying to get to me. And we just stayed. I just stayed there. I mean, I kept the lights on. I was afraid to go out because it was night. I was afraid to go out through the porch. The bedroom had double doors, and you could go out into the porch and then out of the house. And so, I mean, it was horrible. And I just said, when Katie wakes, we're leaving. And that's what happened. She stayed with me all night and she dozed. I didn't. When she woke up, it was daybreak. And I remember running out and on the porch was like a porch room. And I opened the drawer because I'd been a freelance writer. And I did all of my it's a day of tapes, little tape, mini cassette tapes. I had them all in a drawer. I opened up the drawer, put them all in my purse and ran with Katie, and we got out. That was it. So then I write When Katie Wakes. Before I wrote When Katie Wakes, I'm in Kansas, and I get a phone call from an editor that I'd worked with in Tampa, and she said, we have one of the interviews you did, the interviewee is questioning about blah, 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 and we just need to double check. I said, that's cool. I keep all my tapes. So here I am in Kansas in the middle of the winter. I'm popping in one tape after another. And here's my abuser's voice. And he is in a hotel in Hollywood with a prostitute.
Oh my God.
And he's not paying the prostitute. And she says her brothers are going to break his kneecaps. And why he recorded himself, I have no idea. And that tape had been in that group that I just scooped up and ran with. So then I write When Katie Wakes, and it's all done. It was a huge emotional toll to write. And my publisher that gets to the legal department, and legal's like, we can't go out with this. He's very litigious also. And I said, well, I can prove it. And I found the tape again. So that tape is the only reason that book was able to be published
Wow.
because we had external proof that I was telling the truth.
I'm going to back up and then bring it to this point. So by this point, you are already a successful writer,
Yes.
which takes a heck of a lot of confidence to have that kind of a career and success. What made you have that professional confidence, but held you down so that you couldn't take the steps you needed to liberate yourself?
Well, I think there are all kinds of women in the world who are very, very um, competent, competent and more, very in their work life or their education life, they're leaders, but it's a whole different story at home. I think that is very, very common. And so all of my positive energy and the positive feedback I would get would be through my career, through my academic career, through my books. And and I could absolutely fly in those situations. But the emotional stuff at home wasn't prepared, didn't know how to deal with it.
Boy, and doesn't that just show how, whether we're talking violence or anything else, is that we have these people, we put them up as role models, and it seems like they've got it all together, and you really don't know what they are carrying at home.
Yeah, you really don't. And anymore, I'm never surprised.
That's Michelle, what are you thinking there?
It's a very emotional topic for me. I I mean it resonates a lot. I just think about the cycle in my own life, right? Of to the point you were just making, right? Excelling at work, you have healthy boundaries in a career, and then it's like you walk in the door of your home and everything just breaks down, and suddenly you're less than. And learning how to pull yourself out of that and being comfortable exposing that fear, it is hard. And finding a place where you feel safe, and even recognizing what healthy looks like, because
Right.
your reference is chaos and caustic. And I was just thinking, even when you were sharing the story of your dog, I mean, was that the first time you began to understand what love looks like?
Well, that's such an interesting thing that you bring up. And this is the other, their books and writing saved me, but so did animals. And I know that sounds crazy, but I always had a menagerie of wild cats and dogs. They would find me. I would walk down the street and the squirrels I fed would follow me. And so, but it was through dogs, mainly dogs and cats. I know this sounds nuts, but that's where I learned that there was something called unconditional love and what that looked like. I think it's why to this day, we all have triggers. My trigger is I cannot watch or hear at all about any animal being harmed.
Yeah.
Can't do it. I over identify with them, and that's me. I think that in psychologically, I'm probably like, oh, that dog getting beaten is me being beaten.
Mhm. Not being able to defend themselves, something's larger, has control, and
Yeah.
just has to submit to just such an ugly, dark place.
A brutal cruelty.
Yeah. So when you leave an abusive, difficult situation, whether and this could be whatever somebody's leaving, do you immediately live happily ever after, or what happens in the story?
I mean, I think of course, it's not happily ever after for any of us ever, and life's difficult and complex and joyous. But I think it's with any luck, you have friends, even if they're new found friends through the domestic violence movement, or family, or chosens who will be patient and help you as you start your new journey.
So as you started yours, how did your life change? And did it get more ups than downs then, or what happened?
Oh yeah, I mean, very much so. And I don't really, I think that healing takes time. Also, recognition takes time to be able to look back and actually see who I was and figure out why I was that way. I think was a big part of the healing, and not blame myself. I was not to blame. We always, you know how often we blame women who are in these situations? It's not their fault. The gaslighting that goes on, the psychological manipulations that go on, it's immense. And so I don't feel that I was to blame. I did, when I wrote When Katie Wakes, I did think that because I wanted people to understand why a woman might stay. And so I figured out in my life that there was definitely a connection between childhood abuse and then being in that kind of relationship. So even in that book, I go back and forth between a childhood incident and the present moment story of the adulthood abuse. But I think that, I said earlier, it really does take a village, but it takes a village full of love, of people who are compassionate, empathetic, who will hold you while you cry, who will listen to you when you're mad, and just be your friend. That's what people need. They need compassion and friendship, and that's not what they had in those domestic relationships that were so violent. And I think too, what it requires of that village, in addition to love, is patience, because it can take a long time to recover. But women are resilient, and once you're out of the out of the clutches of such a horrible situation, I think that blooming happens pretty fast. It might not be without any lingering bruises, but you're still blooming.
How did you rewrite the tapes in your head?
I don't know what I am, just a stubborn kid. I really am. I'm just not going to let the past keep dragging me down. And at one point, I somehow got smart enough to talk to the little Connie that still lives inside me and tell her she was loved and tell her it was not her fault. I still do that every once in a while. It really helps.
I had some advice during a particular incident where my dad was in the hospital and we didn't think he was going to make it, and at that particular time, and I was in the hospital and so full of anger, it was consuming me. And here he was, at that time we believed on his deathbed, and I couldn't really reconcile all the feelings, right? Because it went from being my hero growing up to this, I just despised him for some things he had done. And I remember I'm sitting in a rocking chair in a waiting room, and I was holding the Bible and I was crying, and I was trying to make sense of it. Like, can I get through this? How do I get through this? And I remember a nurse came in and she sat down with me, and she started talking to me, and she shared a story of abuse in her situation as a child. And she goes, you don't ever forget, but you learn to look back and remember these times without this emotion. So pray for, you don't have to forgive and you don't have to forget, but you learn to look back on it with less of the emotion and connection and the hurt. And it resonated with me a lot and helped me to reflect on a lot of the memories I had. And like you said, Connie, with the goal of understanding and not judgment, understanding what what contributed and what happened in this person's life, because I realized kind of was doing the best he could in that situation, right? It was, if I look back on how he was taught, looking back and understanding he was doing the best he could, and he did love me, it just wasn't healthy. And what can I learn from that? And how can I let it go and forgive and come back to a healthy place? So I hear a little bit of that in what you're sharing of.
Yeah, I mean, Miss Zora and Before Women Had Wings tells Bird, forgiveness isn't for the person who did the wrong. Forgiveness is for yourself. I forgive somebody. I don't. They're out of my life now. I want them to stay out of my life, but I can forgive them so that I can go forward.
Well, that's really important. Think about forgiveness. is it would be so easy if you could just make the decision to forgive so it wouldn't hurt anymore, but you have to work your way into that. So have you learned how to do that and maybe accelerate the process?
Well, forgiveness also doesn't mean excuse. I think for me, forgiveness means I'm not going to let the poison, the toxin still affect me.
Can you just do that by making up your mind, or do you have to work through it to get to that point?
I suppose it's a little of both, you know? I mean, my abuser, I don't really think about, I think more than it, when I do think about it, I'm just sort of, I don't judge it. It happened. I wish it hadn't happened, although I'm not full of regret because I don't believe regret is a very good emotion, very positive, functional emotion. It's just, it's this thing that I know I won't ever get back into. And I'm sort of, maybe the writer takes over and I just kind of look at it in a more objective way. I don't know. With my mom, there is no, of course, there's emotion, but and that will be a lifetime of learning with her and figuring out uh, what, like, who she was and why, and and I grow to love her more with each time I do that kind of questioning. It doesn't mean that I'm letting her off the hook, you know, but I'm not raking her over the coals either.
And
I'm
writing is
interrogating with love.
writing has been, obviously it's your biggest success, but it's also your therapy. And how would you tell other people who haven't used that as a means to accomplish it, how to use writing to help them heal?
But you know, I think that it's what makes us human, storytelling. People say, "Oh, well, what separates humans is that we use tools." Well, animals use tools too. I also think animals tell stories. I mean, dolphins' songs are evidently telling stories, but it is infinitely human to tell story. And if we don't, I think that that's when we start to get into trouble. That's why secrets are so onerous and can be so damaging. So write your story, tell it, you know, journal. That's why we go to shrinks. We go to shrinks because we got to tell the story, you know, and you know, are do they give us good advice? Usually not. They're just sitting there listening. So
Right. It's true.
so you know, if you don't have someone to talk to, write it down, journal, start a journaling group. Every place has writing groups now, but it's so important to get it down. It's getting it out. It's cathartic.
What was the hardest thing you ever had to write?
Mm, I think it might have been When Katie Wakes.
Was it so
Is that I did have to relive, and that can be rewounding. But you know, it wasn't just because I wasn't writing it just privately for myself. This was for public consumption, so it also had to be a work of art, and I had to get it right. And so that was at times pretty difficult. I have to walk away for a while, then come back to it.
how long?
One time, what book was I writing? I don't know. I think it was my other memoir, A Million Fragile Bones, and I had, and I do go back into my some childhood stories in that memoir, and I'm writing, and I look up, and I'm just feeling really, really uncomfortable because I write out loud. I say everything that I'm writing,
As you're
and
doing it?
yeah, I
All
look
right,
like
like,
a
give me an
crazy
example.
woman.
Give me an example.
No, I'm just writing, blah, 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 blah. I'm just verbalizing it. But I looked up and I was really uncomfortable because there I am writing this stuff and writing it out loud. And there was a photograph of my mom and I couldn't do it. And I had just went over and put it face down. It's like, oh no, she's watching, she's listening. I'm going to just put her face down. Writing is such a strange, mysterious, wonderful thing to be doing.
Do you ever rip stuff up?
Do I rip stuff up?
Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
are you good at editing yourself with a machine?
oh, I edit everything is revision, everything.
The thing about digging deep into things that are difficult when you're writing a book is a commitment. It's like getting married to somebody. And there are times when I say, I don't want to spend that much time with that. So how long did the memoir take?
When Katie Wakes was probably written in about a year, which is fast.
So was that a rough year doing it, or was it a triumphant year?
I think it was triumphant. I mean, I don't ever mind having emotion. Having emotion means you're alive and kicking. So that's okay. It's not always pleasant, but you're alive and kicking. So yeah, to get that down, and I do see it as a work of art, and then for it to help other women was amazing.
And which it did. I mean, I just have read so many stories of how that did help and inspire women and actually validate them more than anything.
Yeah, that their experience is that they are not alone in their experience. That there are, unfortunately, legions of women who have had that experience and survived and come out so much better on the other side, so that they can too.
Connie, for people who want to connect with you and stay connected, what's the best way to do that?
You can contact me through email at conniemayfowler@gmail.com. And I'm all over social media. Unfortunately, I like Facebook. Twitter is an animal I don't understand. And this is embarrassing, but I can't figure out Instagram.
Girlfriend, I get it. Michelle does. She understands all of those.
It's like you put up a picture and stuff like, well, but there's no real conversation.
Tell the story. I think Instagram started out as this place, right, where you were just putting the picture. Now what it's evolved into is it's really a place to tell the story. So take the time in the content where the message is and say what you want to say, because that's really what people are looking for.
But isn't that what we do on Facebook?
It's different. You're hitting a different demographic with Instagram than you are with Facebook. So
Connie,
you have a whole new audience of women that need to hear this. I mean, but just what an incredible story. There were a couple of things that I was just taking notes, right, Connie? I love this because I love learning from the wisdom that you shared. And there were a few things that really stood out to me. I really loved when you talked about how books showed you a better life. Yeah. And I think about people who are in a place that's a struggle. Instead of digging deeper into reading the dark stories, look for stories that are going to lift you out and show you the light. And I thought that was just really beautiful. I also appreciated when you said that as you were recounting the story, it wasn't about the accuracy. It was the act of writing that healed the wounds. And I thought that was beautiful. I loved the healing takes time. So have patience, and recognition takes time. And you want to be able to reflect without blame or judgment on the things that have happened to make you who you are. You also talked about really surrounding yourself and finding a village, but it needs to be a village that's full of love, because you really need to have that support structure in place. And don't be afraid of the emotion, because emotion means that you're alive. And then I think that one of the kind of closing points that stood out was storytelling makes us human. So write your story.
Yeah.
You are just an absolute, this was just again, a very emotional for me, and just beautiful story to see where you have evolved to, and how you've taken all of these lessons to become the person you are, that's bringing so much light into the world. And I'm so thankful for you taking the time to share that with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a complete delight. I only cried twice.
Oh my gosh. It was wonderful to have you here.
Thanks.
And
Thank
just
you both for asking.
Understand just how accomplished you are. It's like you've gotten the Oprah now, twice now, and you're the real deal. And what an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is a great conversation. Did you all? Thank you. Made it easy to be this open.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Von Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.